The sun had not yet broken over the Taygetus Mountains when Theron stood at his son's grave. Not the grave that existed, the grave that should have existed. 2 years had passed since Nicias died. 2 years since the Paidonomos had arrived at dawn with words wrapped in ceremony and cold efficiency. Training accident, they said. The boy's body would be prepared according to tradition. No tears, no questions. Sparta does not mourn weakness. But Theron had seen the rope burns on his 10-year-old son's neck. He had read the message scratched into the barracks wall with a broken fingernail. "I'm sorry, father. I'm not strong enough." The official story held. It always held. And Theron, warrior of Sparta, veteran of a dozen campaigns, holder of land and citizen rights earned through blood, had stood silent as they carried Nicias away. He had watched his wife Aleka collapse inward like a building losing its foundation. He had nodded when the elders reminded him that weakness discovered early saves the state from weakness discovered in battle. He had done everything a Spartan should do, and something inside him had broken in a way no Persian spear had ever managed. Now, in the year 385 BC, he stood in his courtyard watching his second son. Leonidas was 6.5 years old. He had his mother's dark eyes and his grandfather's steady hands. He did not cry when he fell. He did not complain when he was hungry. He laughed when he played with his 3-year-old sister Irene, but even that laughter had an edge of caution to it, as if the boy already understood that joy was something you borrowed, not something you owned. In 6 months, the Paidonomos would come for him too. The state would open its mouth and swallow another child. And Theron would stand at the door and watch it happen, because that is what Spartans do. That is what his father did. That is what his grandfather did. 300 years of family honor built on the same foundation: service, sacrifice, silence. Aleka emerged from the house. At 35, she still moved like the athlete she had been. Spartan women trained alongside men, threw javelins, wrestled, ran until their lungs burned and their legs turned to stone. The rest of Greece found it shocking. Sparta found it necessary. Strong mothers produce strong sons. That was the theory. That was always the theory. She stood beside Theron and watched Leonidas stack stones in the corner of the courtyard. The boy was building something. A wall, perhaps, or a fortress. Children play at war before they understand what war costs. "He's ready," Aleka said. Her voice was flat. It had been flat for 2 years. "No one is ready," Theron replied. "Nicias wasn't ready. This one is different. This one is 6 years old." Aleka turned to face him. Her eyes were dry. They had been dry since the funeral that never happened. The mourning that was forbidden, the grief that had nowhere to go, except down into the dark places where Spartan women learned to bury everything soft. "If you're going to doubt the system," she said quietly, "doubt it silently. Doubt it where the neighbors can't hear. Doubt it where our son can't see." She walked back inside. Theron remained in the courtyard. Leonidas looked up from his stones and smiled. A child's smile untouched by understanding. 6 more months of that smile. Then the gates would close and the machine would begin its work. Theron had fought in battles where the odds were impossible. He had held his position when common sense screamed to run. But standing in his own courtyard watching his own son, he felt something he had never felt on any battlefield. Helplessness. The knock came 3 hours later. Theron opened the door to find his father standing in the morning light. Timaeus was 69 years old. He had lost his left eye to a Persian arrow 40 years ago at Plataea. The socket was a puckered scar that he wore like a medal. His hair was white, his back was bent, but his remaining eye was sharp enough to cut. "Walk with me," Timaeus said. They walked through the city in silence. Sparta was not beautiful like Athens. There were no soaring temples, no marble statues celebrating individual glory. The buildings were functional. The streets were clean. Everything served a purpose. Nothing was wasted on decoration or comfort or any concession to the idea that human beings might want to live in a place that felt like more than a military installation. They passed the Lesh, the barracks, where boys lived once the state claimed them. Theron had spent 13 years inside those walls. He still remembered the smell, sweat and leather, and the iron tang of blood that never quite washed out of the stone floors. Timaeus stopped walking. They stood facing the building where Theron's childhood had ended and his education in becoming Spartan had begun. You're thinking about keeping him home, Tamia said. It was not a question. I'm thinking, Theron said carefully, that we train boys to die well. We don't train them to live well. We train them to protect what must be protected, from who the Persians haven't threatened Greece in decades. Athens is our rival, not our enemy. We spend more effort crushing Helot uprisings than fighting foreign wars. We're not protecting Greece anymore, Father. We're protecting a system that's eating its own children. Timaeus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Theron had ever heard it. I had 3 sons, the old man said. You know this. You were the middle child. Your older brother died in the Agoj when he was 9, fell during a drill, broke his neck. Your younger brother made it to 15. He couldn't endure the Cryptia. He walked into the mountains and never came back. The state called it desertion. I called it mercy. Theron stared at his father. In 40 years, they had never spoken of this. You survived, Timaeus continued. You were strong enough, smart enough, hard enough. And I was proud. I am still proud. But every day since your brothers died, I have asked myself the same question. What did we gain? What did Sparta gain by breaking 2 good boys who might have been fine men if we had given them the chance? You never said anything. What was there to say? The system doesn't change because one old man has doubts. But you asked me to walk with you. You asked without words, so I'm answering. If you want to save Leonidas, I will not stop you. If you want to stand at that door in 6 months and hand him over, I will not judge you. But whichever choice you make it with your eyes open. This system killed your brothers. It killed your son. It will kill Leonidas too unless he is stronger than all of them. And even if he survives, you must ask yourself what will be left of him when the machine is finished. They stood in silence. A group of boys ran past 12 or 13 years old barefoot, their cloaks threadbare, their faces already harder than children's faces should ever be. They moved in formation even when no one was watching. They had been taught that the line was everything. Hold the line, die in the line, never break the line. Theron watched them disappear around a corner. I can't take him away, he said finally. If I refuse the Agoj, he loses his citizenship. He loses his future. He becomes one of the inferiors. No land, no rights, no place in society. Better alive and inferior than dead and honored. You don't believe that. Timaeus smiled. It was a sad smile, the smile of a man who has buried too many sons and carried too many doubts to the edge of too many sleepless nights. No, he said. I don't. That's the poison of it, isn't it? We know the cost. We pay it anyway. We tell ourselves it's necessary. We tell ourselves it makes us strong. And maybe it does. But I have lived 69 years in this city, and I have watched it grow smaller every year. We used to bring in 200 boys each Agoji class. Now we bring in 100. Soon it will be 50. We are breeding ourselves into extinction, one broken child at a time. Then what do I do? Timaeus placed his hand on Theron's shoulder. The grip was still strong. Old warriors never quite lose their strength. You do what Spartans have always done. You endure. But this time you endure with purpose. You make sure that boy knows he is more than a weapon. You make sure he understands that honor is not the same thing as obedience. And when the time comes when he faces the choice between what Sparta demands and what his soul requires, you make sure he knows he has a choice. 6 months passed like water through a broken dam. Too fast, too unstoppable. Leonidas turned 7 on a morning that felt like every other morning, except for the knowledge that it would be the last morning of its kind. Theron watched his son eat breakfast. The boy's hands were steady. He did not cry. He had been preparing for this day since he was old enough to understand language. Every child in Sparta prepared for this day. Aleka braided Leonidas's hair one final time. She did not speak. Her face was stone. Irene clung to her brother's leg and wailed. Leonidas patted her head gently. I'll come back, he told her. But he wouldn't, not really. The boy leaving this house would not be the boy who returned. If he returned. The knock came at dawn. The Paidonomos stood at the door with 2 assistants. His name was Kratos. He was 55 years old. His face looked like it had been carved from cliff stone and left to weather in the sun. He did not smile. He did not offer comfort. He simply stated the law. Leonidas, son of Theron, you are called to serve Sparta. You will come now. Leonidas stepped forward. He wore a single cloak. He carried nothing else. Spartan boys entered the Agoge with nothing and earned everything, or they earned nothing and died trying. Theron wanted to grab his son, wanted to lock the door, wanted to run, wanted to fight, wanted to scream that this was insane, that feeding children into a machine that broke most of them and killed some of them and returned the survivors as hollow-eyed men who could hold a spear but couldn't hold a conversation was not strength. It was madness dressed up as tradition. Instead, he nodded. Serve with honor, he said. Leonidas looked up at his father. 7 years old, dark eyes, steady hands. I will make you proud, the boy said. And then he walked out the door. The Paidonomos and his assistants fell into formation around him. 15 other boys joined the procession from other houses. Some of them cried. The ones who cried were struck immediately sharp, open-handed blows that snapped their heads sideways and taught them the first lesson. Weakness will be punished. Always. Immediately. Without mercy. Leonidas did not cry. Theron stood in his doorway and watched his son disappear down the street. Aleka stood beside him. Her hand found his. Her grip was crushing. He's strong, she whispered. So was Nicias, Theron whispered back. They stood in the doorway until the procession was gone. Then Aleka went inside to comfort Irene, and Theron walked to the barracks. He was not supposed to follow. Parents were not supposed to watch. But Theron had lost one son to this system. He would not lose another without at least seeing the cage. He stood across the street from the Lesh. The boys were lined up in the courtyard. Kratos walked the line, inspecting each one like a buyer at a slave market. He stopped in front of a boy who was shaking. The boy could not have been more than 6, small for his age, thin, terrified. Kratos leaned down. What is your name, Philippos? The boy whispered. I cannot hear you. Philippos, louder this time, but the voice still cracked. Are you afraid, Philippos? The boy hesitated, then nodded. Kratos struck him across the face. The blow knocked Philippos to the ground. Blood streamed from his nose. Fear is acceptable, Kratos said calmly. Showing fear is not. Stand up. Philippos stood. His legs shook. His face was already swelling. Kratos moved down the line. He stopped in front of Leonidas. What is your name? Leonidas, son of Theron. Are you afraid? Leonidas met the man's eyes. Yes. Kratos studied him. The courtyard was silent. Every boy watched. Every boy understood that this moment would define what came next. Why do you admit it? Kratos asked. Because you asked, Leonidas said simply. Lying would be cowardice. Fear is honest. Kratos stared at him for 5 long seconds. Then impossibly the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. Interesting, he said. We will see if honesty serves you as well as silence. He moved on. Theron remained across the street, hidden in shadow. He had just watched his 7-year-old son navigate a test that most grown men would fail. Part of him was proud. Part of him was horrified. And part of him wondered if Leonidas had just signed his own death warrant or bought himself a chance at survival. The boys were led inside. The gates closed. Theron stood alone in the street as the sun climbed higher and the city woke, and the machine that had been grinding boys into soldiers for 300 years added 16 new pieces of raw material to its inventory. He walked home. Aleka was in the kitchen. Irene was asleep. The house felt enormous and empty. How did he do? Aleka asked. He told the truth when a lie would have been safer. Aleka closed her eyes. Just like his brother. No, Theron said quietly. Nicias told the truth because he couldn't help it. Leonidas told the truth because he chose to. There's a difference. Is there? Aleka's voice was hollow. Does it matter true or false, honest or cunning? They all end up in the same place. Broken or dead. Theron had no answer for that. He returned to the barracks every day for a week. He could not enter. He could not speak to his son. But he could watch. And what he watched confirmed every doubt that had been eating at him since Nicias died. The boys were stripped of everything. Their clothes were replaced with a single rough cloak. Their hair was cut short. They slept on mats stuffed with the reeds they had gathered themselves. They were fed one small meal a day, barely enough to keep them functional. Hunger was not an accident. Hunger was curriculum. On the third day, Theron saw Leonidas in the courtyard. The boy was thinner already. His eyes had changed, not broken, not yet, but harder. The machine was already working. An older boy, perhaps 18 or 19, stood watching the new recruits. His name was Brasidas. Theron knew him by reputation. Brasidas had finished the Agoge 2 years ago. He had survived the Crypteia. He was being trained as an Iron, one of the young men who would oversee the next generation. Brasidas walked over to Leonidas. He said something Theron could not hear. Leonidas nodded. Brasidas placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Just for a moment. Then he walked away. It was the first gentle gesture Theron had seen inside those walls in 7 days. That night, Theron went to his father's house. Timaeus was sitting by a small fire staring into the flames. The old man looked up when Theron entered. "You've been watching the barracks," Timaeus said. "Every day. What have you seen?" "Exactly what you said I would see. They're breaking them down, piece by piece, day by day." Timaeus nodded slowly. "There is a young Iron, Brasidas. I know his grandfather. Good family. The boy is different from the others. He has not forgotten what it means to be human. Can he protect Leonidas? Protect, no, but he can teach him how to survive without losing himself. That is more than most boys get." Theron sat down across from his father. The fire crackled. Outside, the city was quiet. Sparta was always quiet at night. No drunken revelers, no street musicians, no laughter echoing off stone walls. Just silence and the occasional sound of a helot being moved from one work detail to another. "I want to pull him out," Theron said. "Almosina." "You can't. I want to storm those gates and take my son home. You would be arrested. He would be marked. You would destroy his future and accomplish nothing. And then what do I do? Watch him die like Nicias. Stand here and pretend this is normal. Pretend this is right." Timaeus leaned forward. The firelight carved deep shadows across his scarred face. "You do what I should have done when you were 7, the old man said. "You fight for him, not with swords, not with speeches. You fight by making sure he knows he is more than what they are trying to make him. You visit when you can. You speak truth when you have the chance. You remind him that before he was Spartan, he was yours. And when the time comes, when he stands at the edge of the choice between being a perfect soldier and being a complete human being, you make sure he knows you will love him either way. Will that be enough? I don't know, but it's more than most fathers give, and it's the only weapon we have." Theron stayed with his father until the fire burned down to embers. Then he walked home through dark streets. Tomorrow he would go to the barracks again. He would watch his son from a distance. He would carry the hope that somewhere inside those walls, Brasidas was teaching Leonidas how to hold on to the pieces of himself that Sparta wanted to grind away. It was all he could do. It had to be enough. The gates of the Lesh remained closed. Inside, 16 boys began to learn what it meant to be Spartan. And outside, a father began the long, slow torture of watching his child be devoured by the same system that had devoured his brother, his uncles, and 3 centuries of sons who had no choice but to serve. The sun set behind the Taygetus Mountains. Darkness fell over Sparta. And in that darkness, Theron made a silent promise. "This time the machine will not win. This time I will not stand silent. This time my son will have a choice, even if that choice destroys us both." The first year inside the Agoge was a lesson in hunger. Leonidas learned that the gnawing emptiness in his stomach was not a problem to be solved. It was a condition to be accepted. The single meal each day arrived at sunset. A piece of hard bread, a thin broth made from barley and whatever scraps the kitchen slaves could spare. Sometimes a handful of figs. Never enough. The portions were calculated with precision. Enough to keep a boy functional. Not enough to keep him satisfied. Brasidas explained it on the third night. He gathered the new boys in a corner of the courtyard, and after the older Iron had gone to their own quarters. His voice was quiet, almost kind, which made him dangerous in a different way than Kratos. "You are hungry," Brasidas said. "You will be hungry every day for the next 13 years. This is not cruelty. This is education. A hungry wolf hunts better than a fat dog. Sparta needs wolves." "What if we can't hunt?" Philippos asked. His voice was barely a whisper. The bruise on his face from Kratos' first day blow had turned purple and green. Then you learn, Brasidas said, or you starve. Another boy bigger than the others raised his hand. His name was Kairos. He had the build of a boy who would grow into a bull of a man if he survived long enough. You want us to steal, Kairos said. Not a question, a statement. Brasidas smiled. I want you to eat. How you accomplish that is your business. But understand this. If you steal and get caught, you will be whipped, not for stealing, for being incompetent. Leonidas absorbed this. The logic was pure Sparta. Cleverness was rewarded. Failure was punished. Morality was irrelevant. That night he lay on his reed mat and stared at the ceiling. Around him boys shifted and whispered. Some cried quietly when they thought no one could hear. Leonidas did not cry. He was hungry. He was scared. He missed his mother and his sister and the feeling of being safe. But crying would not feed him. Crying would not protect him. Crying would only mark him as weak. So he thought instead. He thought about what Brasidas had said. He thought about the kitchen where the food was prepared. He thought about the older boys who carried the evening meal to the younger ones. He thought about timing and opportunity and risk. He thought like a wolf. 3 nights later, Leonidas made his first theft. The kitchen was guarded, but the guard was an older boy who was more interested in talking to his friends than watching a pile of turnips. Leonidas slipped in through a side entrance. He took 2 turnips and a heel of bread. He was back in his sleeping quarters before anyone noticed. He shared the food with Philopos. The smaller boy ate like he was afraid the turnip would disappear if he didn't swallow it in 3 bites. Why did you share? Philopos asked when his mouth was empty. Because you would have died without it, Leonidas said. That's not a Spartan answer. It's my answer. Philopos looked at him with something that might have been gratitude or might have been confusion. In the Agoge, kindness was a language most boys forgot how to speak. The thefts continued. Leonidas was careful. He watched patterns. He learned which guards were lazy and which were attentive. He learned that darkness was an ally and that confidence mattered more than speed. A boy who ran looked guilty. A boy who walked like he belonged could steal in plain sight. He was caught twice. The first time the iron in charge made him stand in the courtyard while the sun climbed to its peak. No food, no water, just heat and thirst and the understanding that failure had consequences. Leonidas stood without moving until the sun began its descent. When he was finally allowed to sit, his skin was burned and his lips were cracked. But he had not complained, he had not broken. The second time he was caught, Kratos himself administered the punishment. 10 lashes across the back with a leather strap. The first blow drove the air from Leonidas's lungs. The second made him see stars. By the 5th, he tasted copper. By the 10th, he wanted to scream. He did not scream. When it was over, Kratos leaned down. You're learning, he said, slowly, but you're learning. Leonidas collapsed onto his mat that night. Brasidas appeared with a wet cloth and a jar of oil. He cleaned the wounds in silence. When he was finished, he sat back and studied Leonidas. You're tougher than you look, Brasidas said. I don't feel tough. Tough isn't what you feel. It's what you do when feeling doesn't matter. Leonidas thought about that. Pain radiated through his back in waves. But underneath the pain was something else. Pride, maybe, or just the grim satisfaction of having survived. My father visited today, Brasidas said quietly. He saw you in the courtyard. He asked me to watch over you. Leonidas looked up. Why would he do that? Because your father lost a son to this place. Because he's afraid he'll lose another. Because even Spartans can love their children, even when the state tells them not to. Do you love yours? Brasidas was quiet for a long moment. I don't have children, but if I did, I would want them to be like you. Stubborn enough to survive. Soft enough to stay human. He left. Leonidas lay in the dark and thought about his father. He had not seen Theron since the day he entered the Agoge. But knowing his father was out there watching, caring, fighting, in the only way he could made the hunger a little easier to bear. The months became years. By the time Leonidas turned 10, he had become something different. Not harder exactly, but more efficient. He could steal food without thinking. He could endure pain without flinching. He could sleep on cold stone and wake without complaint. He could march for hours in formation, his bare feet bleeding on sharp rocks, and never break stride. The other boys changed too. Kiros grew into the bull everyone had predicted. He was strong and vicious and utterly without mercy. When weaker boys failed, Kairos was the first to mock them, the first to suggest they were worthless, the first to turn cruelty into sport. Philippos never grew strong. He remained small and frightened and perpetually on the edge of collapse. But he survived because Leonidas made sure he survived. Shared food, shared warmth, shared the unspoken understanding that in a system designed to crush the weak, sometimes strength meant protecting someone weaker than yourself. The older Iron noticed. Some disapproved. Others, like Brasidas, said nothing but watched with quiet approval. Then came the year of the fox. Leonidas was 10 years old. It was winter. The cold was a physical presence sharp enough to cut skin and settle into bones. The boys wore their single cloaks and nothing else. At night, they huddled together for warmth. During the day, they drilled and ran and fought each other in controlled combat that sometimes it became uncontrolled when blood was drawn and anger took over. Food was scarcer than ever. The harvest had been poor. The helots were restless. The state allocated resources to maintaining the army and suppressing rebellion. The Agogi boys were fed last and least. Leonidas was hungry in a way that went beyond discomfort. His ribs showed. His cheeks were hollow. When he stood up too quickly, the world tilted and darkened at the edges. He had to steal, not to supplement his meals, to survive them. The plan was simple. A helot farmer delivered a chicken to the kitchen twice a week. If Leonidas could intercept the delivery, he could take the chicken, kill it quietly, and cook it over a fire he would build in the woods beyond the barracks. It was risky. If he was caught outside the barracks without permission, the punishment would be severe. But the alternative was starvation. He waited until the delivery was made. He followed the helot at a distance. When the man set the cage down to adjust his sandal, Leonidas moved. Fast, silent. He grabbed the cage and ran. The chicken squawked. The helot shouted. Leonidas sprinted toward the tree line. He almost made it. Kratos appeared from nowhere. The old Paidonomos stepped into Leonidas's path like a wall materializing from air. Leonidas tried to dodge. Kratos was faster. He grabbed Leonidas by the arm and lifted him off the ground. The chicken screamed in its cage. Leonidas's heart hammered against his ribs. Kratos stared at him. Put the chicken down. Leonidas hesitated. If he put the chicken down, he would be punished for theft and failure. If he held on to it, he would be punished for theft and defiance. Either way, he would be whipped. Either way, he would go hungry. But there was a third option, a test that older boys whispered about, a test that separated the ones who would survive from the ones who would break. Leonidas opened the cage. The chicken burst out in a flurry of feathers and panic. It scratched and pecked and tried to escape. Leonidas grabbed it and shoved it under his cloak. He pressed it against his stomach and held it there with both arms. The bird went insane. It clawed at his skin. It pecked at his ribs. It tore at him with beak and talons, desperate and terrified. Leonidas stood perfectly still. Kratos watched him. The old man's face was unreadable. Seconds passed. The chicken shredded Leonidas's stomach. Blood soaked into the cloak. Pain screamed through his body. Every instinct told him to let go, to drop the bird, to admit defeat. He did not let go. A full minute passed, then two. The chicken's attacks grew weaker. It was exhausting itself. Or maybe it sensed that this boy would rather than release it. Kratos stepped forward. He reached under Leonidas's cloak and pulled the chicken out. The bird was bloody and broken. So was Leonidas's stomach. Claw marks ran from his ribs to his pelvis. Blood dripped onto the ground. Kratos held up the chicken. It was dead, killed by its own panic and Leonidas's refusal to react. Go to Brasidas, Kratos said quietly. Have him clean those wounds, and tomorrow you will report for extra drills. He walked away. Leonidas stood alone in the courtyard, blood running down his legs, pain radiating through his core. But he had passed. He had endured. He had proven that he could stand in the fire and not burn. Brasidas found him 20 minutes later. The young Iron took one look at Leonidas's stomach and went pale. You're insane, Brasidas said as he cleaned the wounds with wine. The alcohol burned worse than the scratches. I'm Spartan, Leonidas replied. That's what I said. Insane. But there was respect in Brasidas's voice. And when he was finished bandaging the wounds, he handed Leonidas a piece of cooked chicken. Where he got it, Leonidas didn't ask. Some questions were better left unspoken. Leonidas ate the chicken slowly. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. Not because it was good, because he had earned it. That night, Philippos asked him why he hadn't let go. Because if I let go, Leonidas said, Kratos wins, the system wins, and I'm not ready to lose yet. When will you be ready? Leonidas didn't answer. He wasn't sure there was an answer. In the Agoge, you didn't win. You just survived long enough to face the next test. The years continued their grinding march. 11, 12. Each year brought new tests, new pain, new lessons in how much a human body and mind could endure before breaking. At 11, Leonidas participated in his first Artemis Orthia ceremony. The ritual was simple and ancient. A piece of cheese was placed on an altar. Boys charged the altar while older youths and adults whipped them with heavy leather straps. The goal was not to avoid the whips. The goal was to endure them and still reach the cheese. Theron sat in the audience. He had not seen his son in 4 years. The boy who stepped into the arena was taller than he remembered. Leaner. Harder. There was nothing of childhood left in that face. Aleka sat beside him. She gripped the bench until her knuckles turned white. The ceremony began. Leonidas charged with a group of other boys. The whips fell like rain. Leather cracked against skin. Boys screamed. Some fell. Others kept running. The crowd cheered. Leonidas took a blow across his shoulders that should have dropped him. He stumbled, recovered, kept moving. Another whip caught him across the back of his legs. He went to one knee. The crowd roared, while Theron's hands clenched into fists. Get up, he thought. Please get up. Leonidas got up. He reached the altar. His hand closed around the cheese. A final whip caught him across the spine. The blow was so hard, it lifted him off his feet. He hit the ground face first. The crowd went silent. Leonidas pushed himself up. Blood ran down his back in rivers. His face was pale, but he was standing, and he was holding the cheese. The crowd erupted. Theron sat frozen. He had just watched his son be beaten within an inch of consciousness, and everyone around him was celebrating. Aleka leaned close. Her voice was a whisper. He did it. He survived. Is that what we call this? Theron whispered back. Survival. After the ceremony, parents were allowed a brief visit. Theron approached Leonidas in the medical tent where boys were being treated for their wounds. His son sat on a bench, his back a mess of torn skin and bruises. Brasidas was applying salve. Father, Leonidas said. His voice was steady. Too steady. You were brave, Theron said. I was obedient. Is there a difference? Leonidas looked up. His eyes were his mother's eyes, dark and deep. But there was something in them now that had not been there 4 years ago. Something cold. Sparta says no, Leonidas replied. What do you say? Leonidas thought about that. Brasidas finished with the salve and stepped away, giving them privacy. Grandfather sent me a letter, Leonidas said quietly. Brasidas delivered it. He said that being a man is more than being a weapon. He said, I will face a choice someday. Between being perfect and being whole. He said to choose carefully. Do you understand what he meant? Not yet, but I think I will. Theron wanted to embrace his son, wanted to pull him close and tell him he could leave, that they could run, that there was a world beyond Sparta where boys were allowed to be boys. But the tent was full of people. The Paidonomos were watching, and even if they weren't, Leonidas was no longer a child who could be rescued. He was becoming something else, something shaped by the system, something that might survive or might shatter. All Theron could do was place his hand on his son's shoulder. Just for a moment. The touch said everything words couldn't. I see you, I love you, I'm sorry. Leonidas leaned into the touch for maybe 2 seconds. Then he straightened, remembered where he was, remembered what he was supposed to be. The moment ended. Theron left the tent. Outside the sun was setting. Aleka waited for him and, he's going to make it, she said. Wish, I know. Then why do you look like you just watched him die? Because the boy I knew did die today, in that arena. What's left is something else. They walked home in silence. Behind them in the medical tent, Leonidas sat alone and thought about his grandfather's letter, about choices, about what it meant to be whole in a place designed to break you into pieces. He didn't have answers yet, but he had time. 13 years in the Agoga. 8 already gone. 5 to go. 5 more years to learn whether he would survive as a weapon or die as a human being, or find some impossible third path that Sparta had never intended to offer. The years blurred together. 12 became 13. 13 became 14. The lessons grew harsher, the expectations higher, the punishments more severe. At 14, boys were introduced to the Cryptia in a limited form. Not the full horror of the midnight assassinations that awaited them at 20, but preparation, patrols through Helot territory, watching, reporting, learning to see enslaved people not as human beings, but as threats to be managed. Leonidas struggled with this more than any other lesson. During one patrol, he discovered a Helot family hiding a young man who had escaped from a work detail. The fugitive's name was Damon. He was maybe 14 himself, thin and desperate and terrified. The protocol was clear. Report the family. The fugitive would be executed. The family would be punished. Order would be maintained. Leonidas stood in the doorway of their small house and looked at Damon. The Helot boy looked back. Neither spoke, but something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. They were the same age, they had been born in the same city, but one wore a cloak and carried the rights of citizenship. The other wore rags and carried the weight of slavery. Please, Damon's mother whispered, he's just a boy. Leonidas could have said the same thing about himself, but he wasn't just a boy. He was a tool of the state, and the state had given him an order. He left the house. He reported the family, but he did not mention Damon. He said he found evidence of harboring a fugitive, but the fugitive had already fled. The father was arrested. He was executed the next day. The family was left alive but marked. Damon survived. Brasidas found Leonidas that night. The young Iron sat down beside him on the wall overlooking the city. You let the boy live, Brasidas said. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Kratos knows too. He chose not to pursue it. But understand this. You balanced on a knife's edge today. Next time the edge might cut you. Would you have reported the boy? Leonidas asked. Brasidas was quiet for a long time. I don't know. I want to say no. I want to believe I would show mercy, but I was raised in the same system you're being raised in, and that system teaches us that mercy is weakness. So maybe I would have reported him, and maybe I would spend the rest of my life wondering if that made me strong or just cruel. How do you live with that? I don't. I endure it, same as you. They sat in silence. Below them the city slept. Sparta at night was always quiet. No music, no laughter, just the weight of discipline in the silence of people who had forgotten how to be anything except what the state demanded. Leonidas was 15 when his grandfather died. Timaeus passed quietly in his sleep. He was 70 years old. He had survived battles and plagues and the slow grinding erosion of watching his sons die. But time was one enemy even Spartans could not defeat. The funeral was held with full honors. Timaeus had earned them. 40 years of service, countless battles, the loss of an eye, and most of his illusions, but none of his dignity. Leonidas was granted permission to attend. It was rare for Agoge boys to leave the barracks for anything except training. But Timaeus had been a hero, and heroes were allowed to be mourned even in a city that forbade mourning. Leonidas stood beside his father at the pyre. Theron's face was stone. Alika wept quietly. Irene, now 10 years old, held her mother's hand and tried to understand why grandfather wasn't moving. Before the pyre was lit, Theron handed Leonidas a letter. The paper was old. The ink was faded. But the words were clear. Leonidas, it began. I have seen Sparta's glory and its shame. I have watched brave men die for honor. I have also watched good boys broken for no reason. You will face a choice between being a perfect Spartan and being a good man. Choose carefully. Sometimes they are not the same thing. Below that in fresher ink was a postscript. Your father loves you. He may not be allowed to say it, but I can. You are more than a weapon. You are my grandson, and I am proud of you not because you survived, but because you have not let them take everything. Hold on to that. When the time comes to choose, remember that honor is not the same as obedience. Leonidas read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his cloak. The pyre was lit. Smoke rose into the sky. Timaeus burned, and with him went the last voice of the old Sparta, the Sparta that remembered why they fought instead of just how. After the ceremony, Theron and Leonidas walked together through the city. They did not speak. Not. There was too much to say, and no safe way to say it. Finally, Theron stopped. They were standing near the Agoge barracks. Leonidas would have to return soon. Your grandfather was right, Theron said quietly. You will face a choice. And when you do, I want you to know something. Whatever you choose, I will stand with you, even if it costs me everything. What if I choose wrong? There is no wrong choice, only the choice you can live with. Leonidas nodded. He wanted to ask what his father would have chosen. He wanted to ask if Theron regretted his own path. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions that had no answers. Instead, he said, "Thank you for being here." Theron placed his hand on Leonidas' shoulder. This time the touch lasted longer. 5 seconds. 10. Long enough to matter, long enough to be dangerous. Then Leonidas pulled away. He walked back to the barracks. He did not look back. If he looked back, he might not be able to keep walking. Theron watched his son disappear through the gates. Then he walked home alone, through streets that felt emptier than they ever had before. Inside the barracks, Leonidas lay on his mat and read his grandfather's letter one more time. Then he folded it and hid it in a crack in the wall where no one would find it. He was 15 years old. He had 5 more years in the Agoge, and somewhere in those 5 years, he would face the choice Timaeus had warned him about. He just didn't know it would come sooner than he thought, and that when it came, it would arrive covered in blood and carrying a knife. 8 years passed like a river carving stone, slow, relentless, irreversible. Leonidas was 20 years old. He stood in the courtyard of the Lesh on the last day of the Agoge and felt nothing. Not pride, not relief, not even exhaustion. Just a vast emptiness where emotions used to live. He had survived. That was what mattered. That was all that mattered. 13 years of hunger and pain, and tests designed to break anyone foolish enough to believe they were human instead of weapons. 13 years of watching boys fail and fall, and sometimes die. 13 years of becoming exactly what Sparta wanted. Almost. There was still one test left. The Crypteia. The final proof that Leonidas could kill without hesitation, without mercy, without the inconvenience of conscience. Kratos stood before the graduating class. There were 23 of them. Once there had been 50 boys in Leonidas' age group up. Some had died in training. Some had been expelled for weakness. Some had simply disappeared. Their bodies never found their names, never spoken again. 23 survivors. And now they would be tested one final time. The helots grow restless, Kratos said. His voice was old iron, corroded but unbroken. There are whispers of rebellion. Names have been identified. You will hunt these names. You will eliminate them. Quietly, efficiently, without mercy. He handed out assignments. Names, locations, descriptions of targets who had committed no crime except being too strong, too confident, too willing to meet a Spartan's eyes without looking away. Leonidas received his assignment. The name was Damon. Location a farm on the western edge of Helot territory. Description, male, approximately 20 years old, known agitator, suspected of organizing resistance cells. Leonidas' hands did not shake when he read the name. But something cold settled into his chest. He knew this name. He had saved this boy 8 years ago. He had let him live when protocol demanded death. And now the state was ordering him to correct that mistake. The irony was so perfectly Spartan, it almost made him laugh. He was paired with Kairos for the mission. The big man had grown into the monster everyone predicted. Kairos was 20 years old and built like a siege engine. He had killed his first helot at 16 during a suppression riot. He talked about it the way other men talked about losing their virginity. Proud, eager to repeat the experience. They left at dusk. The sun bled red across the mountains. Leonidas moved through the darkness like smoke. Kairos moved like a landslide, all momentum and destruction barely held in check. I hope he runs, Kairos said. I want him to run. Why? Makes it more interesting. Killing a man who just stands there is like slaughtering a cow. Leonidas said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with Kairos was like arguing with a cliff face. Pointless, and likely to get you pushed off. They reached the farm 2 hours before midnight. The house was small, mud brick walls, thatched roof, a single window that glowed with the light of an oil lamp. Kiros wanted to kick down the door. Leonidas convinced him to wait. Watch. Confirm the target before moving. They crouched in the darkness. Through the window, Leonidas could see Damon. The Heelot boy had grown into a Heelot man. He was thin but wiry. His hands moved with confidence as he repaired a fishing net. Beside him sat a woman, his wife probably. She was pregnant. Leonidas watched them talk. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see the way Damon smiled when his wife laughed. He could see the gentleness in how Damon touched her shoulder. He could see two people who had found some small piece of happiness in a world designed to crush them. There's our target, Kairos whispered. Let's do this. We should wait, Leonidas said. Make sure he's alone. He is alone. His wife doesn't count. Neither does whatever's in her belly. Kairos started to move. Leonidas grabbed his arm. The big man turned. In the moonlight, his eyes were empty. Not cruel, just void of anything that might be called human. Wait, Leonidas said again. Why are you having second thoughts? I'm having tactical thoughts. We do this clean, or we don't do it at all. Kira stared at him for 5 long seconds. Then he grinned. Fine. You go in first. I'll cover the back. If he runs, I get him. If he fights, we both get him. Either way, he's dead before sunrise. Leonidas nodded. Kira circled around to the rear of the house. Leonidas waited until the big man was in position. Then he approached the front door. His hand rested on his knife. The blade was sharp enough to split a hair. He had sharpened it himself, oiled it, prepared it for exactly this purpose. 13 years of training, 13 years of preparation. Everything he had endured, everything he had survived, everything he had become led to this moment. He raised his hand to knock, then stopped. There was no honor in this, no glory, no defense of Sparta, just a scared man trying to build a life with a woman he loved and a child on the way. A man whose only crime was existing with too much dignity. Leonidas had been taught that hesitation was weakness, that doubt was failure, that the moment you question an order, you cease to be Spartan. He hesitated anyway. The door opened. Damon stood in the threshold. He was holding a small knife, the kind used for cutting vegetables. When he saw Leonidas, his face went pale. But he did not run. He did not scream. He simply stood there and waited for whatever came next. You, Damon said quietly. Why? Leonidas replied. 8 years ago, you let me live. I did. And now you're here to correct that mistake. Leonidas did not answer. Behind Damon, the pregnant woman appeared. She saw the Spartan cloak. She understood immediately. She placed herself between Leonidas and her husband. Please, she whispered. We've done nothing wrong. You exist, Leonidas said. In Sparta's eyes, that's enough. Damon gently moved his wife aside. He stepped out of the house and closed the door behind him. He stood in the moonlight, unarmed, unafraid. Do it, Damon said. But before you do, answer one question. Why did you save me 8 years ago? I don't know. Yes, you do. You saw a boy who was just trying to survive. Same as you. And you couldn't kill him because some part of you still remembered what it meant to be human. So here's the question. Are you still human? Or did they finally finish breaking you? Leonidas's knife was in his hand. The weight was familiar. The edge was sharp. One thrust, one cut. This would be over. He would pass the test. He would become a full citizen. He would take his place among the warriors who had held the line against Persia and Athens and every threat to Spartan supremacy. All he had to do was kill an unarmed man in front of his pregnant wife. The knife trembled, just slightly, but Damon saw it. You're still human, Damon said softly. They haven't taken everything. Kairos appeared from behind the house. He had heard voices. He had come to investigate. When he saw Leonidas and Damon standing face to face, both alive, both unharmed, his expression darkened. What's taking so long? Kairos demanded. I'm evaluating the situation, Leonidas said. Evaluate faster. Damon looked at Kairos, then at Leonidas. Then he did something that would haunt Leonidas for the rest of his life. He smiled. It's okay, Damon said to Leonidas. You tried. That's more than most would do. Then he turned to Kairos. If you're going to kill me, do it. But let them go. He gestured toward the house. Kiros laughed. You don't make demands. He moved, fast for a big man. His knife was out and buried in Damon's chest before Leonidas could react. The helot fell. Blood pooled around him. His wife screamed from inside the house. Kairos wiped his blade on Damon's clothes. He looked at Leonidas. You're welcome, Kairos said. Now let's finish this. He started toward the house. Leonidas grabbed him. The big man turned surprised. Turned. Leave them, Leonidas said. Our orders are to eliminate threats. His wife could be carrying the next rebel leader. She's carrying a baby? Same thing. They stared at each other. In Kairos's eyes, Leonidas saw the future of Sparta. Efficient, brutal, empty. Everything the system was designed to create. In that moment, Leonidas understood what his grandfather had tried to tell him. There was being Spartan, and there was being human. And sometimes you had to choose. Walk away, Leonidas said quietly, or I will make you walk away. Kairos grinned. You'd fight me over a helot, over a pregnant woman and a dead man who deserved better than this. Kairos's grin faded. He saw something in Leonidas's face that made him recalculate. They were evenly matched in combat, and if they fought here now, one of them would die, maybe both. Fine, Kairos said. But when we report back, I'm telling them everything. Your hesitation, your weakness. You'll never be a citizen. You'll never hold rank. You'll be marked for the rest of your life. I can live with that. Kairos shook his head. No, you can't, but you'll learn. He left. Leonidas stood alone beside Damon's body. The helot's eyes were still open, still staring at nothing. Leonidas closed them. Then he went to the house. Damon's wife stood in the doorway shaking. Leonidas looked at her. I'm sorry, he said. It was the first time he had apologized for anything in 13 years. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but they also felt true. He walked away. Behind him, the woman wept. Ahead of him, the city waited, and with it, the reckoning for his choice. The trial took place 3 days later. Leonidas stood before the Council of Ephors while Kairos detailed every failure. The hesitation, the conversation, the refusal to complete the mission. The charges were clear: disobedience, weakness, failure to serve the state above all else. The penalty was equally clear: expulsion from the agoge, loss of citizenship rights, exile or execution at the council's discretion. Leonidas stood silent while the charges were read. He had known this was coming. He had chosen anyway. Then Theron stood. It was highly irregular. Fathers did not speak at their sons' trials. But Theron had earned enough respect through 40 years of service that the ephors allowed it. My son showed judgment, Theron said. His voice carried through the chamber. The Cryptia is meant to eliminate threats to Sparta, not to murder pregnant women and children. Leonidas identified the threat. He eliminated it. His partner's bloodlust is not evidence of Leonidas's failure. It's evidence of the system's sickness. The chamber erupted. No one spoke against the system, not openly, not in official proceedings. Theron had just broken the most fundamental rule of Spartan society. The eldest of four raised his hand for silence. When the chamber quieted, he spoke. You suggest the Cryptia is flawed. I suggest, Theron said carefully, that a system which measures strength by willingness to kill indiscriminately is not creating warriors. It's creating monsters. And monsters do not build lasting civilizations. Another voice spoke up. Brasidas. He was 33 years old now, a full warrior, respected. His testimony carried weight. I trained Leonidas for 8 years, Brasidas said. He is the finest warrior of his generation. His strength is not diminished by his humanity. It's enhanced by it. A soldier who thinks is worth 10, who only follow orders. The ephors conferred quietly. The debate lasted 20 minutes. When it ended, the eldest ephor delivered the verdict. Leonidas, son of Theron, you will be permitted to complete the agoge and claim citizenship. However, you will be marked as unreliable. You will not serve in the royal guard. You will not hold command. You will fight when called, but you will not lead. This is our judgment. It was a compromise. Leonidas would be a citizen, but a second-class citizen. Forever marked, forever watched, forever suspected. He accepted the judgment with a single nod. It was more than he had expected, less than he deserved. exactly what Sparta offered everyone who dared to be human. The trial ended. Leonidas left the chamber. Theron walked beside him through the city streets. "Thank you," Leonidas said. "Don't thank me. I just made myself a target alongside you." "Was it worth it?" Theron stopped walking. He looked at his son, 20 years old, scarred, hardened, but still capable of mercy. "Yes," Theron said. "It was worth it. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." They walked home. Neither knew that what came next would be worse than any trial, worse than any test, worse than anything the Agogi had prepared them for. 6 years later, Sparta would face the Battle of Leuctra. And everything they thought they knew about strength and honor and the price of perfection would be proven catastrophically wrong. But for now, they walked home through a city that still believed itself invincible, still believed that the system which had ground boys into soldiers for 300 years would last forever, still believed that you could build a civilization on suffering and call it strength. They would learn otherwise. But the lesson would come written in blood. The years between the trial and Leuctra were strange years. Leonidas fought when called. He trained when required. He married Eurydice, a Spartan woman who had been raised with the same brutal efficiency as every other woman in the city. Strong, athletic, capable of bearing children and bearing them without complaint if the state demanded it. They had a son, Timaeus named for his great-grandfather. The boy was 3 when his father marched to Leuctra. Theron was 54. His hair was gray. His body still strong, but showing the accumulated damage of 40 years of warfare. He moved slower now, thought more, questioned everything in ways he had never dared when he was young. He stood beside his son in the phalanx as the Spartan army marched north to meet the Thebans. King Cleombrotus led them. 400 Spartiates, the full citizen warriors, plus thousands of Helot auxiliaries and allied forces. They outnumbered the Thebans. They had superior position. They had 300 years of reputation as the finest infantry force in the world. They had everything except the humility to imagine they could lose. The Theban general was named Epaminondas. He was a philosopher and a tactician, and a man who understood that tradition was only strength until someone invented something new. The battle began at dawn. The Spartans deployed in their traditional formation. King and elite troops on the right wing, allies on the left, the phalanx in the center. It was the formation that had won every major battle in Spartan history. Epaminondas looked at that formation and smiled. He massed his forces on his left wing, 50 shields deep instead of the traditional 8. A concentrated hammer aimed directly at the Spartan right, where the king and the best warriors stood. The Spartans saw the formation. They did not understand it. How could depth overcome quality? How could concentration defeat discipline? They were about to learn. The Theban left wing struck like a battering ram, 50 men deep pushing forward with unstoppable momentum. The Spartan right wing held for maybe 3 minutes. Then the pressure became too big, the line buckled. King Cleombrotus fell, spear through the chest, the first Spartan king to die in battle in living memory. The right wing collapsed. Leonidas was in the center. He saw the king fall, saw the line break, saw everything he had been taught was impossible happening in front of his eyes. "Hold the line." The order came from somewhere, maybe Brasidas, maybe another officer. It didn't matter. The line was breaking. Theron fought beside his son. A Theban spear caught him in the leg. He went down. Leonidas turned. "Hold position," Kairos shouted from nearby. He had become exactly what everyone expected. A killing machine, brutal and efficient and utterly without mercy. Leonidas looked at Kairos, then at his father bleeding on the ground, then at the battle that was already lost. He broke formation. He grabbed Theron under the arms and dragged him backward. Theban soldiers pressed forward. Someone threw a spear. It missed by inches. Leonidas kept pulling, kept moving, kept choosing his father over his formation. "Leave me," Theron gasped. "Hold the line." "The line is broken," Leonidas said, "and I'm not leaving you." He pulled Theron to safety. Other Spartans were retreating now. The word itself was poison. Spartans did not retreat. But the alternative was annihilation. The Battle of Leuctra ended in catastrophe. 400 Spartans dead, including the king, including most of the royal guard, including the myth of Spartan invincibility. The survivors limped home. Theron's leg was ruined. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. but he was alive, because his son had chosen him over duty. The city received them in silence. No celebration, no condemnation, just shock. Sparta had lost. Truly, completely, definitively lost. Within months, the consequences became clear. Thebes marched into Messenia. They freed the Helots. Tens of thousands of enslaved people who had worked Spartan land for generations simply walked away. Sparta's economy collapsed overnight. The land that had funded the warrior class was gone. The Helots who had done all the labor were free. The system that had sustained itself for 300 years had nothing left to stand on. Council meetings became desperate. Some wanted to fight to reclaim Messenia. Others wanted to reform to open citizenship to more people to adapt to the new reality. Theron spoke at one such meeting. "We built our strength on a foundation of slavery and suffering," he said. "We told ourselves it was necessary. We told ourselves it made us great. And perhaps it did, for a time. But that time is over. We can either adapt or we can die clinging to a system that has already failed." The old guard voted down every reform. Tradition, they said. Honor, they said. We are Spartan, they said. Theron left the meeting knowing that nothing would change. The city would rather die than admit it was wrong. That night, he sat with Leonidas in his home. Timaeus, now 9 years old, played in the corner. The boy was strong, healthy. In 5 years, he would enter the agoge. "I can't send him on," Leonidas said quietly. Theron looked at his son. "You don't have a choice." "There's always a choice. You taught me that. Grandfather taught me that." "What choice do you see?" Leonidas was quiet for a long time. Then he said the words that would change everything. "We leave." The decision was not made lightly. Leonidas and Theron spent weeks debating. Aleka participated. Eurydice resisted at first but eventually agreed. Even Brasidas, now 52 and bitter about how the old guard had responded to Leuctra, gave his quiet blessing. "There are others," Brasidas said, "families who are thinking the same thing. Sparta is dying. Some of us see it, most refuse to, but those who see it have a choice. Stay and die with the city, or leave and preserve something worth preserving." He handed Leonidas a list of names, families who had lost faith, warriors who had survived Leuctra and come home wondering what they had been fighting for. "You won't be the first to leave," Brasidas said, "and you won't be the last." The night before they left, Theron visited Timaeus' grave, his first son, the boy who had hanged himself rather than face another day in the agoge. "I'm sorry," Theron whispered to the stone upper. "I should have saved you. I should have been brave enough to choose you over the system. I wasn't, but I'm choosing now. For Leonidas, for Timaeus, for all the boys who deserve better than this." He stood, walked home. The house was packed. A single cart held everything they owned. It wasn't much. Spartans didn't accumulate possessions. They accumulated honor and duty and the kind of trauma that took generations to heal. At dawn, they left. Theron, Leonidas, Aleka, Eurydice, Timaeus, and Irene, now a young woman of 20, who had never been given the choice to leave but seized it when offered. They walked through the city gates as the sun rose. A few neighbors watched, some with contempt, some with something that might have been envy. At the gates, Brasidas waited. He handed Leonidas a letter. "For when you settle," he said, "names of others who left. You'll want to find them. Build something new, something better." "Will you come?" Leonidas asked. Brasidas shook his head. "I'm too old, and someone needs to stay and remember what we were supposed to be." They embraced. Then Brasidas stepped back. The family walked through the gates. Timaeus looked back at the city. "Grandfather," the boy said, "will I ever be Spartan?" Theron looked down at his grandson, 9 years old, strong and curious and unburdened by the weight of a system designed to break him. "No," Theron said, "you'll be something better. You'll be free." They walked toward Athens. Behind them, Sparta continued its slow collapse. Citizen numbers dwindled. The old traditions hardened into ritual. By the time Rome conquered Greece, Sparta had become a museum. Tourists paid to watch boys whipped at Artemis Orthia. The city that had once terrified the world became a cautionary tale about the cost of perfection. But Leonidas and his family survived. They settled in Athens. Timaeus grew up to study philosophy. He wrote a treatise called On True Courage that argued the bravest act was choosing compassion over conformity. 3 generations later, his descendants were among those who preserved Greek wisdom through the Roman period and beyond. They had lost Sparta, but they had saved their souls. And in a quiet house in Athens on a night when the family gathered for dinner, Theron, now 70 years old, held his great-grandson and told stories about the city he had left behind. Not stories of glory, not stories of invincibility, stories of boys who became weapons, of a system that consumed its children, of a civilization that perfected the art of war but forgot the art of living, and stories of the choice he had made, to walk away from everything he had been taught to value, to choose his family over his city, to choose humanity over honor. Was it hard? His great-grandson asked. The hardest thing I ever did, Theron said. Harder than any battle, harder than any test. Do you regret it? Theron looked around the room, his children, his grandchildren, people who laughed freely and spoke their minds and were allowed to be whole instead of perfect. No, he said. I regret many things. The sons I couldn't save. The years I spent serving a system I should have questioned sooner. But leaving never. That was the first truly brave thing I ever did. He set his great-grandson down. The child ran off to play, and Theron sat by the fire and thought about the city he had left behind. Sparta would be remembered. Its warriors would be celebrated. Its battles would be studied. Its sayings would be quoted for thousands of years, but the cost would be forgotten. The broken boys, the murdered helots, the systematic destruction of everything soft and human in pursuit of an ideal that could never sustain itself. Theron had been part of that system. He had served it, believed in it, nearly lost everything to it. But in the end, he had made a different choice. And that choice, more than any battle he had fought or any honor he had earned, was the legacy he wanted to leave. Not the Spartan who held the line, the father who walked away, the man who chose love over glory, the warrior who finally understood that the greatest courage is not enduring suffering. It's choosing to end it. The fire burned low. Outside Athens lived and breathed and celebrated and argued and created in ways Sparta never could. And Theron closed his eyes and slept the sleep of a man who had finally, after 70 years, made peace with himself.